Picture this. I worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, and wore the same shoes for 5 years just to make sure my kids had the life I never did. But the day I finally needed them, when I was sick, broke, and begging for help, they turned their backs on me. The children I sacrificed everything for abandoned me. But what they didn't know. Life has a cruel way of teaching lessons. If you've ever given your all to someone only to be left broken when you needed love the most, then you'll feel this story in your bones. Smash that like button, subscribe to Red Silk Revenge, and settle in. Because this isn't just about betrayal, it's about karma catching up in the most unexpected way. I always believed that being a parent meant giving without question. When I held my first child in my arms, tiny and fragile, I swore I'd move mountains if that's what it took to give them a better life than mine. And when my second child came along, that promise doubled. From that moment, my life stopped being about me. Every dream, every desire, every ounce of energy I had, it all went to them. I grew up poor. My parents weren't bad people, but survival was always the only goal. There were no birthday parties, no warm jackets in the winter, no dreams about college. I wanted my kids to have everything I never did. So I worked. Hard. Too hard, some would say. I picked up shifts at the diner in the mornings, then cleaned offices at night. My hands cracked from the chemicals, my feet ached from standing, but when I came home and saw my kids sleeping peacefully, I told myself it was worth it. Always worth it. I skipped meals so they could eat seconds. I patched up my old sneakers with duct tape so they could wear the new pair they'd been eyeing. When the bills stacked up, I'd cry quietly in the bathroom so they wouldn't see. But even through the tears, there was always this hope, this vision, that one day they'd understand. That one day, they'd look at me and say, "Mom, Dad, you gave us everything. We'll take care of you now." But life doesn't always work the way you imagine. As they grew older, the sacrifices grew too. High school meant sports uniforms, field trips, and late-night study snacks. College meant tuition I could barely scrape together, loans I co-signed that I'm still paying off, and care packages I sent even when my pantry was bare. When my daughter wanted to study abroad, I said yes even though it meant selling the only jewelry I had left from my mother. When my son needed a car for his internship, I took out a loan in my name, one that nearly ruined my credit. I never told them no, not once. Because in my mind, love wasn't about boundaries, it was about sacrifice. And maybe, that was my biggest mistake. I remember one winter vividly. The house was freezing because I couldn't afford to fix the heater. I bundled myself in 2 sweaters and 3 blankets while my kids sat warm in their dorm rooms, never knowing their parents shivered through the night just so they wouldn't have to. Still, I kept giving. Still, I kept believing. That belief carried me for decades, until the day my body finally gave out. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away. I brushed it off. Then came the fatigue, so heavy I could barely stand through a shift. One morning, I collapsed in the kitchen, right there on the cold tile floor, clutching my chest. That's when the truth hit me. I couldn't do it anymore. I needed help, and in my mind, there was no question where that help would come from. My children. The very people I had poured my entire life into. Surely, after all those years, they would be there for me. I remember the first call. My hands trembled as I dialed my daughter's number. She answered, cheerful, busy. I told her about the doctor's visits, the medications, the bills I couldn't keep up with. There was silence on the other end. Then she said, "Mom, I'm really sorry, but things are tight right now. Maybe you can figure something out." Figure something out. I'd been figuring things out my entire life for her. I swallowed the hurt, told myself maybe my son would understand. But when I called him, the answer was colder. He sighed, frustrated, as if my plea for help was some kind of burden. "I've got my own life, Mom. I can't keep bailing you out. You'll manage, you always do." That night, I sat alone in the dark, replaying every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every skipped meal. My children, the ones I had given everything for, had abandoned me with nothing. The realization was a knife to the heart. Not just because of the money, not just because of the sickness, but because I finally saw the truth. To them, I wasn't a parent anymore. I was a problem. And something inside me broke. But here's the thing about being broken: sometimes, it's the only way you can rebuild. Sometimes, it's the only way revenge is born. Because they thought I'd always be their safety net. They thought I'd keep giving, keep sacrificing, even when I had nothing left. But they were wrong. Dead wrong. And they were about to learn that the parent they abandoned had one last lesson to teach them, one they would never forget. The days after those phone calls were some of the loneliest of my life. I sat in that silent house, walls peeling, heater broken, cupboards nearly empty, waiting for a knock on the door, a text, a visit. Anything. But nothing came. Weeks passed. My daughter posted photos online, smiling with friends in expensive restaurants, holding cocktails that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. My son bragged about his new promotion, posing next to the car I had once helped him buy. And me. I was scraping together change from the couch cushions just to buy bread. Every picture they posted felt like a slap in the face. How could they laugh, eat, and live so lavishly, knowing their parent was crumbling? One night, the electricity shut off. I sat in the dark, wrapped in blankets, the silence pressing in on me. That was the moment it truly sank in: they didn't care. They weren't coming. I had given my life to two people who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone. The betrayal burned deeper than any wound I had ever felt. And yet, with the bitterness came something else: clarity. I realized I had spent my whole life mistaking sacrifice for love. I had thought giving everything would make me invaluable. Instead, it made me invisible. To them, my sacrifices weren't treasures, they were expectations. They thought I owed them. And now that I had nothing left to give, I was worthless in their eyes. But here's the thing: people only see what you allow them to see. And I decided right then I wouldn't let them see my pain anymore. That night, under the dim light of a candle, I pulled out an old box of documents. Bank statements, loan agreements, bills with their names tied to mine. You see, in their hunger for success, they had leaned on me too: co-signed loans, financial favors, quiet little help me out just this once moments. I had always said yes. Always. But debts don't vanish. Paper trails don't disappear. As I sifted through those papers, an idea began to form. A slow, simmering plan that curled like smoke in the back of my mind. Revenge. Not the screaming, shouting kind. Not the dramatic scenes they might expect from someone desperate. No. This would be quiet. Precise. The kind of revenge that wouldn't just make them regret abandoning me, it would force them to face exactly what they had created. But before I could even start planning, fate delivered one final shove. It was a Sunday afternoon when the phone rang. I recognized my daughter's number, and for a second, just a second, hope flared in my chest. Maybe she had come around. Maybe she realized how cold she had been. I answered. Her voice was cheerful. Hey, Mom, quick question: do you still have your old credit card? Mine's maxed out and I need to book a flight. I sat there in stunned silence. She hadn't called to check on me. She hadn't called to ask if I was okay, if I was alive. She just wanted more. And when I hesitated, she grew impatient. Mom, come on. Don't be difficult. You've always helped me out before. That was it. The last straw. I told her no. Firmly. For the first time in her life, I said the word she hated most. And do you know what she did? She hung up on me. No goodbye. No are you okay? Just click. I stared at the silent phone in my hand, my heart pounding, a strange calm washing over me. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't even anger. It was something colder. Stronger. Resolve. They had abandoned me when I needed them most. They had proven their love was conditional, that it only existed as long as I could serve them. Fine. If that was the way they wanted it, then I would show them what life looks like when the parent they took for granted stopped being their safety net. And little did they know, I still had cards to play. Cards that would flip their perfect lives upside down. Because I wasn't just their struggling, sick, abandoned parent anymore. I was about to become the lesson they would never forget. Once the word no left my lips, something inside me shifted forever. 4 years, I had been their crutch, their shield, their never-ending well of sacrifice. But now, I was done. And as I stared at that box of documents late into the night, the path forward became clear. You see, in their climb to the top, both my children had leaned on me more than they realized. My daughter's study abroad. She had taken out a loan in my name. My son's shiny car for his internship. The lease was under my signature. Even their college tuition had threads tied back to me, co-signed agreements, deferred bills, sacrifices I never told them about. I pulled each paper out slowly, spreading them across the kitchen table like puzzle pieces. Together, they painted a picture my children had conveniently forgotten. Their success wasn't built alone. It was built on me. My sweat. My labor. My willingness to bleed for them, and that meant one very important thing. If I stopped carrying the weight, it would all come crashing down. The thought was intoxicating. For years, I had begged life to give me justice, begged my kids to show me love. But now, I realized justice wasn't given, it was made. I began with small steps. Phone calls. Quiet arrangements. I reached out to banks, explained my situation, and withdrew my name from their financial safety nets. The credit cards they used so freely, closed. The loans I had been buffering, no longer my responsibility. At first, the silence continued. Days went by with no reaction. But then came the storm. My son called, his voice tight with panic. "Mom, what happened to the car payments? They're saying it's overdue." I let him stew for a moment before answering calmly. "I told you I can't help anymore. You'll need to figure it out yourself." The silence on his end was almost sweet. Then came the explosion. "Are you kidding me? You can't just." But I cut him off. "I can." And I did. I hung up before he could argue. For the first time, I felt powerful. Then came my daughter. Her voice was shrill, accusing. "Mom, the bank is saying the loan is bouncing back. What did you do?" I remembered all the nights I had cried alone, all the times I had gone hungry so she could eat. And I smiled. I did what I should have done years ago. I stopped sacrificing myself for people who don't care. Her gasp on the other end was priceless. The fallout came quickly. My son's precious car. Repossessed within weeks. My daughter's lifestyle abroad. Cut short, her bills piling up, her credit tarnished. 4 years, they had lived cushioned by the belief that no matter what, I would clean up their messes. But now, they were standing in the wreckage of their own entitlement. Did I feel guilty? For a fleeting second. Old habits die hard. But then I remembered the coldness in their voices when I had begged for help. The dismissal. The abandonment. No. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. But this was only the beginning. Because as their financial scaffolding collapsed, I realized I held something even more powerful. Information. All those years of being their parent, their confidant, their fixer, I knew their secrets. The mistakes they had made. The favors they owed. The lies they told to get ahead. And revenge isn't just about stripping someone of comfort. It's about showing the world who they truly are. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream, or beg, or argue. I was going to let the truth do the screaming for me. I started drafting letters. Carefully worded, factual, undeniable. To employers. To landlords. To people who needed to know who my children really were when no one was watching. It wasn't slander. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was simply the truth. Their truth. And when those letters reached their destinations, my children would finally learn the lesson I had spent a lifetime teaching. You cannot build your happiness on someone else's sacrifice without paying the price. It didn't take long for the first cracks to become earthquakes. My son was the first to stumble. He had built his identity around success, the shiny car, the big promotion, the illusion of being unstoppable. But when the car was repossessed, the image began to crumble. His co-workers whispered. His boss noticed the tardiness, the excuses. Without me covering his late fees and smoothing over his messes, his carefully curated life collapsed under its own weight. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he'd been demoted. The golden boy wasn't so golden anymore. And my daughter. She wasn't faring any better. Without the financial cushion I'd provided, her debts caught up quickly. The credit cards stopped working. The landlord grew tired of her late payments. Eventually, she had to pack up her fancy apartment and come crawling back home, though not to my door. She stayed with friends, her pride too wounded to face me. And then came the fallout from the letters. I hadn't written anything cruel. Just the truth. My son had lied on applications, claiming he paid for his own education. My daughter had manipulated people into lending her money, never paying them back. Employers, landlords, even friends, people began to see who they truly were. Calls started pouring in. Not to me, no, to them. Confrontations, lost opportunities, burned bridges. The world was finally holding them accountable in a way I never could while shielding them. For once, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel worthless. I felt vindicated. The best part? I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to beg or fight. I just stepped back, let the truth speak louder than any words I could ever say. But then, something unexpected happened. One evening, as I was sipping weak tea in the quiet of my kitchen, there was a knock at the door. I froze. I hadn't had visitors in months. Slowly, I opened it and there stood my daughter. Her once perfect hair was tangled, her eyes swollen from crying. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to do." For a moment, I almost faltered. Almost. Because the instinct to protect her, to shelter her, still lived somewhere inside me. But then I remembered that phone call, the way she had hung up on me without a second thought. So I stepped aside, not to invite her in, but to show her the emptiness of the house. The cracked walls, the broken heater, the barren shelves. "This is what I had when I begged you for help," I told her softly. "And you turned away." Her tears fell faster. She begged. Apologized. Promised she would change. But I knew better. Apologies born of desperation aren't apologies at all. They're just another form of survival. I told her to leave. The look on her face was a mixture of shock and devastation, but I didn't waver. Because this wasn't cruelty. This was clarity. And she needed it. A week later, my son appeared too. He didn't cry, he raged. Accused me of sabotaging him, of ruining his reputation. He stood in my doorway, red-faced, shouting, "You're supposed to be my parent." And I, calm as ever, replied, "And you were supposed to be my child." His rage faltered. He blinked, stunned into silence, before storming off. In that moment, I felt it, the climax, the peak of years of buried pain finally finding its release. I had spent a lifetime bending, breaking, and bleeding for them. And now, they were forced to feel the weight of what abandonment really meant. Justice didn't come in one loud explosion. It came in ripples, in slow realizations, in the mirror of consequences. And standing in the wreckage of their perfect little worlds, my children finally faced the truth. They had lost the one person who had always been in their corner. And they had no one to blame but themselves. After my son stormed away, silence filled my house again. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was freeing. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel chained to anyone else's expectations. I didn't feel like my worth was measured by how much I gave, how much I endured, or how much I sacrificed. I sat at my old kitchen table, sipping tea from a chipped mug, and I felt a quiet pride. Not in their downfall, but in my own strength to finally stop enabling them. You see, that's the truth no one tells parents. If you give away every piece of yourself, there will be nothing left when you need it most. And if your children have grown accustomed to taking, they won't know how to give back. I had raised them with love. I had taught them kindness, hard work, and respect. But somewhere along the line, they learned only how to consume and demand, and by the time they abandoned me, they had already abandoned the values I once thought I instilled in them. So no, I don't regret what I did. I don't regret letting the world see them for who they are. I don't regret stepping back and letting consequences speak louder than I ever could. Because for the first time, the scales felt balanced. I started focusing on me. I joined a small community group for seniors, people who understood loneliness, who knew what it meant to be forgotten. I planted flowers in my tiny yard. I cooked meals that I wanted to eat, not ones to stretch for mouths that never thanked me. And slowly, I rebuilt a life not as someone's mother, someone's savior, or someone's backup plan, but as me. Do I still ache sometimes? Yes. Do I wish my children had chosen differently? Of course. But I don't live in that ache anymore. I don't let it define me. Because I realized something powerful. Revenge isn't always about destroying someone else. Sometimes, it's about refusing to let them destroy you any longer. And that was my revenge. As for my children, they still stumble, still scramble, still chase the life they think they deserve. And every time they do, they remember the one person they thought would always pick up the pieces is no longer there. That emptiness they feel, that's the echo of their own choices. And I live each day knowing that the greatest justice wasn't what I did to them. It was what I finally did for myself. This is my story of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimate revenge, not with anger, but with silence. And trust me, it left them with nothing but regret. Large red circle. If you've ever been betrayed by the ones you loved most, this story will hit deep. Microphone # subscribe to Red Silk Revenge for weekly stories of love, lies, and unforgettable revenge. So tell me, what do you think? Were my kids just entitled, or did I fail as a parent somewhere along the way? And if you were in my shoes, would you have taken them back, or slammed the door like I did?